You think you know history? Think again. Forget the kings and battles for a moment, and discover the hidden power behind empires. Forgotten technologies that were so revolutionary, they laid the very groundwork for modern society. We're talking about inventions so simple, yet so impactful. They'll make you rethink everything you thought you knew about progress, presented in a uniquely tranquil way. Before you get comfy, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, only if you're actually enjoying it. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'm always curious to see the mix of places and time zones hanging out here together. If you close your eyes and imagine the distant past, not the age of kings or castles, but the very foundations of human history, you might picture people crouched around a fire, shaping their world with the simplest of tools. Before there was bronze, before there was iron, before the great glittering empires built with stone and mortar, there was obsidian, a dark, glassy stone born from the heart of volcanoes, sharp as lightning when fractured, beautiful and dangerous all at once. For tens of thousands of years, obsidian was one of the most prized substances on Earth, not because it glittered like gold, but because it cut with a precision almost beyond imagination. Even today, under microscopes, the edge of an obsidian blade is finer than the best steel scalpel. To hold such a blade in your hand is to hold a sliver of volcanic fire, cooled into glass, transformed into a tool of survival. Imagine one of our early ancestors kneeling in the dust, a piece of obsidian cradled in their hands. They would strike it carefully with another stone, chipping away tiny flakes, each strike deliberate, each flake sharpening the edge until it gleamed. This was called flint knapping, though obsidian was far sharper and more brittle than ordinary flint. The maker would need patience, skill, and an understanding passed down from generation to generation. This knowledge was not written in books, but remembered in hands, in the rhythm of striking stone against stone. Too much force and the piece would shatter. Too little and the edge would be dull. The perfect blow created a blade that could skin an animal, cut fibers into rope, carve wood into tools, and even prepare food for the fire. The difference between success and failure was the difference between survival and hunger. Across the world, different cultures discovered obsidian, often near volcanic regions where the Earth's molten heart had cooled too quickly for crystals to form. In Anatolia, in the Near East, obsidian from the mountains was traded across hundreds of miles. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs and the Maya used it to craft not only weapons but ritual objects, polished to mirrors that reflected faces with eerie clarity. In the highlands of Ethiopia, obsidian flakes were found that date back hundreds of thousands of years, some of the earliest tools ever shaped by human hands. It is humbling to realize that this black glass tied together the stories of people, continents apart, who never knew of each other's existence, yet relied on the same technology. Picture, if you will, an obsidian blade used in a hunt, a spear tipped with that shining stone, flying through the air, striking true into the side of a deer or antelope. The animal falls, and the people gather, their survival secured for another day. The blade cuts through hide, through sinew, through muscle with an ease no dull stone could match. Around the fire that night, the obsidian rests beside the hunter, gleaming faintly in the light. For them, it was not simply a tool but a companion, a silent partner in the endless struggle for life. Obsidian was not only practical but spiritual. To many cultures, it carried a sacred meaning, born as it was from the Earth's fiery core. In Aztec belief, obsidian was tied to Tezcatlipoca, a powerful god whose name meant smoking mirror. Priests used polished discs of obsidian as divination tools, gazing into their reflective surface to glimpse visions, messages, and prophecies. Imagine standing in a dark temple chamber, torches flickering, the obsidian mirror reflecting shadows and firelight, drawing the priest into its depths. What they saw was a mystery, but the glass became a doorway to the divine. Here we see technology not as something separate from belief, but interwoven into the very fabric of culture, carrying both practical and mystical weight. Trade in obsidian was so important that archaeologists can sometimes trace the flow of ancient commerce by testing the chemical composition of artifacts. Each volcanic source produces obsidian with a unique signature, like a fingerprint. Tools found in distant settlements often match quarries hundreds of miles away, showing that people carried, traded, and valued this material across vast distances. To think of prehistoric trade is to picture travelers carrying not sacks of coins or bars of metal, but bundles of black glass, shining in the sun, as precious as anything later civilizations would call wealth. The sharpness of obsidian is not an exaggeration. Even today, some surgeons experiment with obsidian scalpels, because the edges can be many times sharper than steel, cutting cleanly at the cellular level. Though rare in modern medicine, this fact highlights how extraordinary it was for ancient people to work with such a material. What they held in their hands was not just stone, it was the sharpest edge nature could offer. And yet, because it is brittle, it could break easily, requiring skill not only to make but to use. This balance between fragility and precision mirrors much of human progress. The sharper the tool, the greater the risk, and the greater the reward. Think of the variety of objects fashioned from this volcanic glass: knives with edges that could butcher animals, arrowheads for hunting and warfare, scrapers for preparing hides into clothing, tiny flakes, sharp enough to perform delicate cuts in bone or skin. And beyond tools, there were ornaments, beads, pendants, mirrors. These were not luxuries for the elite alone. In many societies, obsidian was woven into daily life, both ordinary and ceremonial. To hold an obsidian blade was to hold a link between the practical and the symbolic, between survival and meaning. Now imagine the passage of time. For thousands of years, obsidian held its place as one of humanity's greatest resources. Then, slowly, bronze appeared, a mixture of copper and tin, stronger, more durable, less fragile. Later, iron came, reshaping the world once again. The old black glass did not vanish entirely, but it faded into the shadows, replaced by metals that built swords, plows, and empires. Yet, even as the world turned to bronze and iron, obsidian remained in use in places where it was abundant and where its sharpness was still valued. Among the Aztecs, obsidian swords called macuahuitl were edged with blades so sharp they could slice through flesh and bone with terrifying efficiency. These weapons combined wood and stone, a technology both ancient and advanced, devastating in the hands of skilled warriors. There is something haunting about the way obsidian slipped into obscurity. For so long, it was the cutting edge literally of human survival. And yet, once replaced by metal, it became almost forgotten. Its legacy preserved in archaeology, in scattered tools lying buried in the earth, waiting to be uncovered. When you see one in a museum, you are looking at more than a piece of stone. You are looking at the memory of hands that shaped it, of minds that understood how to transform nature into survival, of lives that depended on that sharp black edge. Think of a small obsidian flake, buried in the soil for thousands of years. Rain falls, earth shifts, and eventually a curious archaeologist uncovers it. In that moment, the flake speaks across time. It says, "Here was a person who stood in this place, who knelt and struck stone against stone, who made this edge, who used it." It is as close as we can come to shaking hands with the distant past. The tool is humble, but in its sharpness lies the very essence of human ingenuity. We tend to think of technology as something modern, something new and glittering. But obsidian reminds us that technology is not defined by electricity, by machines, by digital screens. Technology is any application of knowledge to shape the world. For a hunter 20,000 years ago, the obsidian blade was as advanced as a smartphone is to us. It extended their abilities, multiplied their survival chances, and connected them to a network of trade, culture, and belief. It was not just stone, it was progress, embodied in black glass. Now, as you drift towards sleep, imagine that obsidian blade again, smooth in the hand, cool to the touch, yet sharp enough to cut with invisible precision. It gleams faintly in firelight, a companion of humanity for millennia, now lying mostly forgotten. And yet, though it is no longer common, its story still shapes us. It reminds us that even the simplest objects can hold extraordinary power. It whispers of the patience of ancient hands, of the fire that forged it, of the survival it enabled. In the quiet of the night, it becomes less a tool and more a symbol of endurance, of fragility, of brilliance hidden in the earth. And perhaps, as you fall into dreams, you can imagine a world long ago where black glass was treasure, where survival was a matter of sharp edges, and where the greatest technology of all was not metal or machine, but the quiet, enduring power of obsidian. When we walk among the ruins of Rome today, it can feel like stepping into a dream. Columns rise into the sky, arches stand in quiet defiance of time, and domes echo with the whispers of centuries. Tourists shuffle over worn marble floors, cameras clicking. But if you stand still, if you let the noise fade, you might hear something else. The voice of stone itself. It speaks softly of an ancient recipe, of a material that has outlasted empires, earthquakes, storms, and wars. That material is Roman concrete. It is not glamorous in appearance. It does not gleam like marble or shimmer like gold. But it is, in its way, a kind of alchemy and invention, so enduring that it has kept the bones of a civilization standing for over 2,000 years. Concrete is everywhere in the modern world. We see it as dull and grey, poured into sidewalks, bridges, and highways. It is cheap, common, unremarkable. But in Rome's time, concrete was nothing less than a revolution. Before it, builders relied on cut stone, stacked block upon block, heavy and rigid, or on mud brick, which crumbled with time and weather. Stone was strong but inflexible. It limited imagination. Roman concrete, however, allowed architects to shape curves, arches, and domes, to mold buildings into forms that seemed to float. Imagine walking into the Pantheon, that great temple whose dome still soars above Rome. Its roof is the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world, and it has stood since the 2nd century AD. Think of that while empires have risen and fallen, while centuries have washed over Europe, while fires, wars, and neglect have reduced countless monuments to dust. The Pantheon's dome is still there, still whole, still gazing upward like an unblinking eye to the heavens. The secret lies in the recipe. Roman concrete, or opus cimanticium, was made by mixing lime with volcanic ash and stones. When combined with seawater, something remarkable happened. Instead of weakening over time, as modern Portland cement often does, Roman concrete grew stronger. Minerals formed inside the cracks, sealing them, healing them, as though the material were alive. Imagine a wall that repairs itself, a harbor structure that resists salt and waves for centuries, not by resisting the sea, but by embracing it, by letting the chemical dance continue long after the builders had vanished. This was not magic, though it must have felt like it. It was chemistry, deeply understood, perhaps more deeply than we give credit for. Picture a Roman engineer standing by a bay on the Italian coast, watching as workers pour the mixture into wooden frames beneath the water. The lime and volcanic ash react with seawater, binding the rubble together into a mass that hardens even as the waves crash over it. This is how the Romans built harbors, breakwaters, and piers that allowed ships to dock safely, turning their empire into a network tied by trade and supply. Without durable ports, Rome could not have fed its people, could not have sustained its armies, could not have reached across the Mediterranean like a giant's hand. Concrete was not just a building material, it was the hidden skeleton of empire. We rarely think of concrete as beautiful, but the Romans did. For them, it was a material of possibility. They did not always leave it bare. Often it was faced with brick or stone, marble or stucco. But beneath the surface was concrete, shaping vaults and walls, filling cores, supporting arches. Walk the Colosseum and you see stone blocks, yes, but behind them is a framework of concrete. Its weight and flexibility allowed tier upon tier of arches to rise, holding tens of thousands of spectators who cheered as gladiators fought. The laughter, the roars, the gasps, they all echoed through a building whose bones were poured, not carved. The Romans experimented constantly with their mix, adjusting proportions, testing strengths. Different projects required different recipes. Volcanic ash from Peziali near Naples became especially prized, so much so that the word Pazialia still refers to volcanic ash used in cement mixtures today. With it, Roman concrete achieved its legendary durability, and so we find aqueducts that stretch for miles, carrying water across valleys and hills, still standing in part today. Bridges span rivers, some still usable, their arches unbroken. Even tombs and temples, weathered but uncollapsed, hold their form. The fact that Rome left so much behind is not only due to its ambition, but also to this humble mixture of ash, lime, and stone. It is easy to forget how radical concrete was. Before it, buildings could only be as strong as the stones they were made of, each block stacked on another. With concrete, walls could be cast in place, poured into forms, shaped by imagination rather than stonecutters' limits. Architects could build vaults that soared overhead, domes that floated like the sky itself. They could shape spaces not just for shelter but for awe. The Pantheon, with its oculus opening to the heavens, is not just a building but a vision made possible by this invention. And yet, despite its brilliance, Roman concrete was eventually forgotten. When the empire declined, when knowledge fractured into fragments, the recipe slipped into obscurity. Medieval builders returned to cut stone and mortar. They did not have the volcanic ash, or perhaps they did not understand the precise chemistry. For centuries, the secret lay buried in the ruins, unrecognized. Only in the modern age did scientists begin to study it closely, to see why Roman harbors resisted the sea, why Roman structures endured when modern concrete crumbles within decades. The answer lies in crystal-steiny mineral formations that grow inside cracks, sealing them. Roman concrete was, in a way, designed not to resist time, but to work with it. Imagine the patience of such a material. A wall stands, a crack forms. Instead of widening, instead of splitting the structure apart, new minerals grow within it, binding it tighter. The wall heals itself. Centuries pass, the wall still stands. It is a humbling thought that the builders of Rome, with no electricity, no digital simulations, no steel reinforcement, created a substance more enduring than much of what we make today. They worked with nature rather than against it, with ash and water and stone, creating something both simple and profound. For the people of Rome, concrete changed daily life. It gave them aqueducts that carried fresh water into their cities, fountains that splashed in the squares, baths where citizens soaked in heated pools. It built roads and bridges that bound the empire together. It raised amphitheaters where dramas played out, basilicas where justice was served, and temples where gods were honored. Imagine living in a small Roman town, waking in the morning to fetch water from a fountain, walking under arches that framed the sky, attending a gathering in a basilical of it, resting on this hidden foundation. You might never think of the concrete itself, but you would live in a world shaped by it. There is something poetic in the fact that we rediscovered concrete in the modern age, reinventing it without fully understanding what Rome had achieved. Our concrete, made with Portland cement, is strong but brittle. It cracks, it wears, it must be reinforced with steel. In time, it crumbles. Highways must be replaced, bridges repaired, buildings demolished. And yet, Roman concrete, humble and ancient, continues to endure. The ruins of Rome whisper to us that durability is not a matter of brute strength, but of harmony with nature, of chemistry that allows stone to breathe and heal. As you imagine these ruins now, in the quiet of the night, think of how concrete shaped not only the buildings but the people who lived within them. Think of children splashing in fountains, of merchants unloading ships at harbors, of senators walking under arches, of worshippers looking up at the Pantheon's dome. All of them, unknowingly, trusted their lives to this silent invention. It was the foundation of their world, invisible yet indispensable. And even now, though the empire has long faded, its concrete holds, whispering its story to anyone who cares to listen. When you next see a photograph of Roman ruins, look not at the marble or the carvings, but at the core, the bones beneath. That is where the true wonder lies. A material that endures storms and centuries, not flashy but steadfast, carrying within it the memory of a civilization that dared to dream bigger than stone could allow. Roman concrete is more than an invention. It is a quiet testament to human ingenuity, to patience, to the strange truth that sometimes the simplest recipes outlast the grandest ambitions. And as you drift into sleep, you can imagine yourself walking the streets of ancient Rome. The walls rising around you, arches framing the sky, domes soaring overhead. You are safe beneath them, as countless others were, because long ago, hands mixed ash, lime, and water, creating a material that still holds, still shelters, still speaks across the ages. If you try to imagine the past before the tick of a clock, before the chime of bells, before wristwatches and digital screens, you find yourself in a world where time itself felt softer, less exact, measured not in seconds and minutes, but in shadows, in the rising and setting of the sun and the turning of the stars. Yet human beings have always needed to know the passage of hours more precisely than the sky alone could provide. Farmers needed to water fields at the right moment. Priests needed to perform rituals in exact sequence. Judges had to measure speeches in court. And so, long before gears and pendulums, long before sand flowed through glass hourglasses, people turned to one of the simplest and most beautiful ways of keeping time: the flow of water, the water clock, or clepsydra. meaning water thief in Greek, was one of humanity's first attempts to measure time mechanically. The concept seems almost obvious once you think of it. Water flows at a steady rate. If you allow it to trickle into or out of a container, then you can mark the passage of hours by the rising or falling level. But what is obvious to us was once a revelation. Imagine standing in a dim temple hall in ancient Egypt, perhaps 3,500 years ago, watching as water drips from a small hole in a vessel. The surface lowers slowly, predictably, along the inside of the bowl. Careful markings indicate the passing of each portion of the night. Priests watched this steady decline, using it to time offerings and chants, ensuring that rituals aligned with the movements of the stars above. The dripping of water was not only a measurement, it was a rhythm, a heartbeat that kept ceremonies in harmony with the cosmos. The earliest known water clocks come from Egypt, dating to around 1500 BC. One discovered at Karnak was shaped like a stone vessel with sloping sides and a small hole near the bottom. As water leaked out, lines carved on the interior marked the hours. This was not precise by modern standards, but it was steady enough to mark the watches of the night, guiding priests who had to divide their duties into equal parts. Imagine the temple halls lit by oil lamps, shadows flickering on walls of hieroglyphs, the silence broken only by the drip of water echoing through the chamber. The sound itself must have been hypnotic, a reminder that time was flowing like the Nile, slow but unstoppable. Later, the Greeks and Babylonians refined the clepsydra, using it not only in temples but in courts and assemblies. In Athens, speeches were timed with water clocks. A litigant would stand before the court, his words flowing as steadily as the water trickling away in the vessel beside him. When the water was gone, his time was over. No more words, no more persuasion. The image is almost poetic. Words flowing like water, both limited, both precious, both slipping away once used. In a world without stopwatches, the fairness of a trial rested on nothing more than the gentle leak of water into a bowl. The designs grew more elaborate over time. Instead of a simple leaking bowl, some water clocks used a constant inflow, a vessel slowly filling as water dripped in. Others connected the rising or falling water level to floats that could move dials, indicating hours on a scale. In Babylon, in Greece, and in China, inventors began to see that water could not only measure time, but display it. Imagine a bronze vessel with a float inside, slowly rising as water entered. The float connected by cords to a small figure holding a pointer, which in turn traced the movement across a dial. To those who watched, it must have seemed almost magical. Time given a body, a figure that moved on its own, guided by nothing but water's patient flow. In China, the water clock reached levels of complexity that bordered on the astronomical. By the Han Dynasty, engineers were building elaborate devices that not only marked hours but tracked celestial movements. Later still, in the Tang and Song dynasties, great water-driven astronomical clocks rose in palace courtyards. Suzong's famous clock tower of the 11th century used water to power a chain drive that turned an armillary sphere, showing the positions of the heavens. Imagine standing before that tower, hearing the drip of water deep within, seeing gears turn, celestial globes rotate, bells chime, and figures emerge. All of it, at its heart, driven by the same principle as the humble leaking bowl, water flowing at a steady pace. But the beauty of water clocks lies not just in their complexity, it lies in their intimacy. They measured time in a way that was alive, almost breathing. Modern clocks tick, sharp and mechanical, dividing time into rigid beats. A water clock trickled, whispered, sighed. Its sound was soft, its pace unhurried. It felt closer to the rhythms of nature, like rain dripping from eaves, like a stream winding over stones. To fall asleep near a water clock must have been like listening to the earth itself marking hours, gentle and patient. Yet for all their elegance, water clocks had their flaws. They changed with temperature, with the pressure of water, with the size of the hole. In cold, the flow slowed. In heat, it quickened. To keep them accurate required careful attention, constant adjustment, and sometimes correction by the stars themselves. This makes them all the more human. They were not perfect machines, but living instruments, needing care like a garden, guided by observation and patience. Still, they spread across the ancient world, used in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, India, China, and beyond. Each culture shaped them in its own way, embedding them into rituals and daily life. For some, they marked religious ceremonies. For others, they regulated legal proceedings. In India, texts describe the use of water clocks for timing religious offerings, linking devotion to the steady flow of time. In Rome, they became common household devices, a way to mark hours indoors when sundials could not function. Imagine a Roman home in the evening, a small clepsydra on a table, dripping away as the family prepared for sleep, its gentle rhythm marking the passage of time unseen. Over centuries, water clocks grew more ornate. Some were designed as works of art, decorated with figures, fountains, and automata. Imagine a clock in the palace of an Eastern ruler. As water flowed, floats rose, triggering small doors to open, little figures of musicians to play, birds to sing. The passage of time became a performance, an entertainment, a reminder that even hours could be made beautiful. For rulers, such clocks were symbols of power and knowledge. To control time was to control the rhythm of life itself. But eventually, water clocks gave way to other methods. Sand in hourglasses proved simpler and more portable. Mechanical clocks, with their gears and escapements, surpassed them in accuracy and reliability. The drip of water grew less common, replaced by the tick of metal teeth, by bells chiming from towers. By the late Middle Ages, water clocks were curiosities, relics of an earlier age. Some remained in temples, in palaces, in scholarly collections, but the world moved on. Time grew sharper, stricter, measured by machines rather than streams. And yet, water clocks are not truly forgotten. Their legacy remains in the very idea of mechanical timekeeping. For they were among the first devices to separate time from the sun and stars, to make it something measurable, controllable, human. They taught us that hours could be marked, not only by nature's cycles, but by instruments of our own design. In that sense, every clock, every watch, every phone displaying the hour owes something to the humble, dripping vessel of antiquity. Now, as you listen in the quiet of your own night, imagine that ancient water clock again, a vessel of clay or stone, smooth to the touch, filled with cool water. A tiny hole at the bottom, a single drop forming, trembling, then falling. Another drop follows, then another. Slowly, steadily, without pause, without rush. Time passes in drips, in ripples, in silence. The sound is soft, hypnotic. You can almost hear it now, that gentle rhythm, marking the flow of hours, as people long gone once heard it. Priests, judges, scholars, and families each, guided by water's patient voice. In the end, perhaps water clocks remind us of something we often forget. Time is not truly measured in ticks or chimes, in numbers on a dial. It is measured in the quiet flow of moments, in the steady current of life itself. Like water, it cannot be held, only noticed as it passes, drop by drop. And so, as you drift into sleep, let the image of the water clock soothe you. Let the drops fall softly in your imagination, each one carrying you further into rest. For though the vessels are long broken, though the temples are ruins, and the courts are silent, the memory of water flowing in time remains, whispering still in the human heart. Imagine standing in the arid heartlands of Persia more than 2,000 years ago. The sun is relentless, pouring down over a land where rain is scarce, and rivers are too few to nourish the soil. To survive here, to raise crops and build cities, required not just endurance but brilliance. And so, in silence and patience, one of the world's most ingenious technologies was born. The canot, an underground aqueduct system that carried water across miles of desert without spilling a drop to the thirsty sun. These channels, hidden beneath the earth like secret rivers, sustained civilizations for centuries and are among the most remarkable forgotten technologies humanity ever devised. Yet today, most people have never heard of them. The genius of the canot lies in its simplicity. At its core, it was a sloping tunnel dug gently downward into the earth, starting from an aquifer in the mountains. From there, the water would trickle naturally, obeying gravity's pull until it reached the plains where people lived. Vertical shafts, spaced like beads along the length of the tunnel, allowed workers to descend during construction, to remove soil, and later, to provide ventilation and maintenance. From the surface, the shafts looked like a line of circular wells stretching far into the horizon, neat little dots across the desert, but beneath them lay the arteries of life itself, unseen and unceasing. When you imagine a desert, the first image that comes to mind is often lifeless sand, a place where plants wilt and people wither. Yet the Kannot transformed these landscapes. Villages bloomed in places where no rivers flowed, their fields green with barley and wheat, orchards bursting with pomegranates, figs, and apricots. In many ways, the Kannot made civilization possible in Persia. Without it, cities like Yazd or Gonabad would never have thrived in such forbidding terrain. To walk in a Persian garden of paradise, as the word itself was derived from their paradisa, or enclosed garden, was to witness the direct gift of this hidden engineering. The very concept of paradise in literature and religion owes something to the way Qunots allowed lush gardens to flourish against all odds. Constructing a Kannot, however, was no small feat. It required extraordinary patience, coordination, and above all, courage. Imagine teams of workers descending narrow shafts, digging sideways through rock and soil, inch by inch, in suffocating darkness. The tunnels sometimes stretched for tens of kilometers, requiring years of labor. Workers navigated by touch and instinct, without the benefit of modern surveying tools. To align the shafts perfectly, to maintain just the right gradient so the water flowed but did not flood, was an art passed down through generations. It was a knowledge guarded as closely as a family heirloom, because it was not just skill but survival. If a community lost its ability to dig and maintain Qunots, it lost its life. There was also a sacred dimension to this technology. In the harsh landscapes of Persia, water was revered as holy, a symbol of purity and life itself. The Zoroastrian religion, dominant in ancient Persia, placed water at the heart of its rituals. To pollute water was a grave sign, and so, the Kannot was not merely a clever engineering trick, but a deeply spiritual endeavor. It was a way of protecting water from evaporation and contamination, of keeping it hidden and pure until it reached those who needed it. Walking along a Kannot-fed garden, hearing the gentle burble of water in a narrow channel would have felt like a small miracle in the desert heat. As dynasties rose and fell, the Kannot remained. The Achaemenids, builders of the Persian Empire, encouraged their spread, recognizing that control of water was control of power. Alexander the Great, when he conquered Persia, marveled at the Qunots and ordered their preservation. Later, the Islamic caliphates expanded their use, carrying the knowledge across the Middle East, into North Africa, and even to Spain. The Spanish Asacuris irrigation ditches still seen in Andalusia owe their origins to the Persian Kannot. In fact, even in Latin America, the Spanish colonists introduced similar underground water systems, a testament to the durability of this ancient technology. The Kannot was never a mere local trick. It was an idea that rippled outward, shaping lands far beyond its birthplace. Life around a Kannot was shaped by its rhythm. The distribution of water was a carefully managed affair, often organized by local councils or overseers, known as mir. Each farmer had a designated time when water would flow into their fields, measured not in hours but sometimes by the burning of candles or the length of a shadow. This timekeeping around water created a social fabric, where disputes over irrigation were settled with strict fairness, because water was too precious to waste or fight over endlessly. In many villages, the Kannot was the center of social order, as vital as a market or temple. Yet, as with all forgotten technologies, time was not kind to the Kannot. Modern pumps and drilling rigs offered faster, easier access to water, but often without the same wisdom. Where the Kannot delivered a sustainable trickle, pumps pulled water greedily, draining aquifers at dangerous rates. Over time, many Qunots dried up, abandoned as relics of a slower age. Today, thousands of shafts still dot the Persian landscape, many of them collapsed or filled with sand, their underground rivers silent. And yet, remarkably, some still flow. In places like Yazd, Qunots continue to provide water to homes, a testament to the resilience of an idea that has endured for more than 2 millennia. To think about Qunots is to reflect on a broader truth about human ingenuity. We often equate progress with newness, with steel, with engines, with the power to conquer nature. But the Kannot reminds us that progress can also mean harmony, working with the forces of nature instead of against them. It was slow, yes, but it was enduring. It was labor-intensive, but it was sustainable. In an age when we worry about water scarcity and environmental collapse, the Qunots' wisdom feels not ancient at all, but urgently relevant. Picture, if you will, lying in the shade of a Persian orchard, the air heavy with the scent of ripening fruit. The ground beneath you cooled by the water flowing silently through channels just below the surface. You do not see the water's source. You only see its effects, the life it brings, the peace it nurtures. The Connaught was never designed to impress with grand architecture, like an aqueduct arching across the sky. Its grandeur was quiet, hidden underground, a secret river threading through the desert. It is a forgotten technology, yes, but one that once shaped the destiny of civilizations, and perhaps one whose story still has something to teach us about balance, patience, and respect for the resources that sustain life. When you look at the remains of the Roman world, what's most striking isn't just the artistry or the scale, it's the endurance. The Colosseum still rises from the heart of Rome, scarred yet unbroken. The aqueducts still stride across valleys, their arches lifting water as if time itself could not erode their purpose. The Pantheon still cradles the sky beneath its dome, a building so complete in its proportions that it feels more like a discovery of nature than a work of human hands. How could such things survive, while so much else of ancient life has been carried away by wind and rain and centuries? The answer lies in something both humble and profound. Roman concrete, the forgotten recipe that allowed an empire to turn stone and earth into monuments for the ages. It's easy to dismiss concrete as mundane. Today, it's everywhere: bridges, sidewalks, buildings, towers. It is so ordinary we barely notice it, except perhaps when it cracks beneath our feet. But in the Roman world, this grey mixture was not only revolutionary, it was transformative. It turned a city of brick into a city of marble, into the empire of stone that symbolized permanence and power. The Romans called their mixture opus cimenticium, and though the name might not sound extraordinary, the results were unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. So what made it different? At its heart, Roman concrete was a blend of lime, water, stones, and most crucially volcanic ash, known as pozzolana. When lime and volcanic ash combined with water, they underwent a chemical reaction that created long-lasting interlocking crystals within the mixture. These crystals bonded the concrete together in a way that made it not only durable, but capable of healing itself. If small cracks formed, moisture would seep in, and instead of widening the damage, it would trigger the growth of new minerals that sealed the fracture. A building made of Roman concrete was, in essence, alive in a quiet geological sense, constantly repairing and strengthening itself over time. Imagine then, a Roman engineer at the edge of the Mediterranean, supervising the construction of a harbor. The waves crash against the wooden molds sunk into the shoreline. Slaves and workers carry buckets of the grey mixture, pouring it directly into the water. Today's concrete would dissolve and crumble in salt water, washed away before it hardened. But Roman concrete, enriched with volcanic ash, did the opposite. The seawater triggered the chemical reactions that made the structure stronger. With each wave, with each tide, the concrete grew tougher. Harbors built in this way survived centuries of storms, sometimes even earthquakes, their foundations gripping the seabed long after the empire itself had vanished. One of the most astonishing examples was the harbor of Caesarea in Judea, built by Herod the Great under Roman guidance. It was vast, ambitious, stretching into the sea with breakwaters of poured concrete. Archaeologists studying its ruins today have found that the material remains remarkably intact, despite being submerged for over 2,000 years. Modern engineers, in comparison, struggle to design seawalls that last even a few decades before crumbling under the assault of waves. But the true crown of Roman concrete is the Pantheon. Built in the 2nd century under Emperor Hadrian, it remains the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. To stand beneath it is to feel a sense of scale that is almost cosmic. The dome soars upward, 43 meters in diameter, perfectly balanced, its weight distributed so masterfully that it has endured for nearly 2 millennia without collapse. How did they do it? The answer lies once again in their mastery of concrete. The Romans adjusted the mixture as they built upward. At the base of the dome, the concrete was dense and heavy, filled with basalt and travertine to provide strength. As they climbed higher, they replaced these with lighter volcanic stones like pumice, reducing the load on the structure. The result was a dome, both massive and weightless, crowned with the famous oculus, the circular opening at the center that relieves stress and bathes the interior with shifting light. For the Romans, the Pantheon was more than a temple. It was a statement of dominion, not just of Rome over the world, but of humanity over the elements. They had bent stone and ash and fire into forms that rivaled nature itself. The dome became a sky captured in stone, a permanent echo of the heavens. And yet, for all its grandeur, the secret was in the quiet chemistry of their concrete, a knowledge that has only recently been pieced back together. The science behind Roman concrete reveals why it has survived so well. Modern Portland cement, the basis of most of today's concrete, is made by heating limestone and clay at very high temperatures, producing clinker that is then ground into a fine powder. When mixed with water and aggregates, it hardens quickly and strongly, but over time, it is prone to cracking. Salt water in particular eats away at it, weakening the structure. Roman concrete, on the other hand, used a lower temperature process and incorporated volcanic ash, which interacted with lime in ways that produced rare minerals like tobermorite. These minerals are incredibly stable, and when exposed to water, they continue to grow, sealing gaps and reinforcing the material where our concrete is rigid and brittle. Roman concrete is flexible and regenerative. It is almost poetic to think that the very thing we consider ordinary today was, in their hands, something closer to magic. And perhaps it truly was magic to them, for they could see the results, but not the microscopic structures forming inside their walls and domes. Their knowledge came from observation, from trial and error, from the craftsman's intuition passed down through generations of builders. A mason mixing lime with ash on a Roman hillside may not have known why his mixture grew stronger in water, but he knew it worked. He had seen it hold against the tide, and so he trusted it. As centuries passed, though, this knowledge slipped away. When the Roman Empire fractured, so too did the transmission of its secrets. Volcanic ash deposits near Naples and Pozzuoli, which had once supplied the empire's builders, were no longer mined. The grand tradition of monumental construction slowed, replaced by the smaller scale of medieval stonework. Gothic cathedrals soared with pointed arches and flying buttresses, but their builders did not pour great domes of concrete. They returned to cut stone, brick, and mortar, working wonders of their own but leaving behind the knowledge of Rome's self-healing concrete. For over 1,000 years, the secret remained buried in the ruins. When the Renaissance blossomed, artists and architects looked back to Rome with awe. Brunelleschi, designing the dome of Florence's cathedral, studied the Pantheon carefully. He marveled at its form, but even he did not know the secret of its material. He built with bricks and ingenious scaffolding, but not with Roman concrete. The recipe remained hidden in the dust of history, until the modern age of science began to probe the mysteries of ancient materials. Only in the late 20th and early 21st centuries did researchers, analyzing samples under microscopes, begin to understand what the Romans had achieved. What's fascinating is that this forgotten technology may hold lessons for our future. Modern cement production is one of the largest contributors to global carbon emissions. The process of heating limestone consumes enormous amounts of energy and releases vast amounts of carbon dioxide. Roman concrete, by contrast, used a far less energy-intensive method, and because it lasted so much longer, it required fewer rebuilds and replacements. If we could adapt their methods, if we could rediscover the balance they struck between lime, ash, and stone, we might find a way to build not only stronger, but also more sustainably. In a world anxious about climate change, the whispers of Roman builders may yet guide us forward. Imagine, then, lying back and picturing the daily life of those builders. A team of laborers gathers at dawn, near a hillside where volcanic ash has been quarried. The air smells faintly of sulfur, dust clings to their skin. They haul baskets of ash to the mixing ground, where lime has been slaked with water, its caustic scent sharp and biting. Stones lie in piles, waiting to be blended. The workers stir the mixture with wooden paddles, the grey slurry thick and heavy, before pouring it into molds set along the foundation of a wall. Their hands are rough, their bodies weary, but their work is steady, purposeful. They do not know that centuries later, their labor will still stand, that their mixture will outlive empires and kingdoms, revolutions and wars. They only know the rhythm of the task, the feel of the material in their hands, the slow transformation of dust and water into permanence. And as the night falls, as the city quiets, you can almost imagine the soft sound of waves lapping against a Roman harbor wall, the concrete beneath the water slowly hardening, bonding, growing stronger with each passing hour. The builders sleep, unaware of the alchemy taking place in their absence. Time itself becomes their ally, turning their ordinary ingredients into something extraordinary. In the end, the story of Roman concrete is a reminder of how civilizations are built not only on politics or armies, but on quiet technologies that shape daily life. It is a story of endurance, of human ingenuity, of knowledge lost and rediscovered. And perhaps, as you drift towards sleep, you might carry with you the image of a Roman dome stretching over the city, its oculus open to the stars, its walls holding firm against the sectorizer, silent testament to the forgotten technologies that once shaped the world and may yet shape it again. Close your eyes and picture the desert, an endless expanse of sand and rock, heat shimmering on the horizon, the air so dry that even your breath feels parched. To live in such a place seems impossible. Rain falls rarely, rivers are scarce, and the land offers little comfort to those who walk it. Yet, in this seemingly inhospitable world, a people once thrived. The Nabateans, an ancient Arab civilization, carved out not only a living but a flourishing culture in the deserts of what is now Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and beyond. Their capital, Petra, is known today as one of the most breathtaking archaeological wonders in the world. Its facades carved into rose-red cliffs. But what allowed Petra and the Nabateans as a people to exist in the first place was something far less visible, yet even more extraordinary: their mastery of water. The Nabateans developed one of the most ingenious water management systems of the ancient world, a forgotten technology that turned barren desert into a thriving hub of trade and life. It is tempting, when we look at Petra's grand tombs and temples, to see only the artistry, the elegant Hellenistic columns, the carvings blending Greek and Eastern styles, the monumental scale. It feels as though the Nabateans were preoccupied with beauty and display. Yet all of this grandeur rested upon something far more practical. Without water, there could be no city. Without careful management, the rare rains of the desert would vanish into the sands or rush away in flash floods, destructive rather than life-giving. The Nabateans understood this and transformed their environment into one of resilience and abundance. They learned to catch water where it fell, to store it with care, and to deliver it where it was most needed. In a land that gave little, they extracted everything. Their system was subtle, almost invisible to the casual visitor. As you walk the winding paths of Petra, you may notice channels cut neatly into the rock, following the contours of cliffs. These were not accidental cracks, but carefully designed conduits. Rainwater, rare but sudden, was captured before it could disappear into the ground. Cisterns, some hidden within the earth, others carved into stone, stored the precious resource. These cisterns were often lined with waterproof plaster, preventing seepage and evaporation. They were sealed tightly, their openings small and shaded, to preserve every drop. Archaeologists have discovered reservoirs capable of holding thousands of cubic meters of water, positioned strategically to supply different parts of the city. This storage meant that a single storm could sustain Petra's inhabitants for months, even through the driest seasons. Equally brilliant was the way the Nabateans tamed the violence of desert storms. When rain did come, it often arrived in sudden, torrential bursts. Flash floods could sweep away homes, destroy crops, and carve deep scars in the land. The Nabateans answered with an elaborate system of diversion. Channels guided the floodwaters into controlled paths, slowing their force. Terraces and dams redirected streams into catchment areas. The result was a landscape reshaped, not by destruction but by design. Where others might see chaos, the Nabateans saw opportunity, a way to harvest not only water, but also the silt and fertile soil carried by the floods. Their terraces trapped this rich material, making agriculture possible in places that seemed hopelessly barren. Life in Petra depended on these invisible veins of water. Imagine waking at dawn in the Nabatean city, the air cool and still. A woman walks with a clay jar balanced on her shoulder, heading toward a cistern. She lowers a rope and carefully fills her vessel. The water cool and sweet, preserved from rains that fell weeks or months earlier. Nearby, a farmer tends to small plots of vines and figs, his crops nourished by channels that drip water sparingly but steadily from hidden reservoirs. A caravan arrives at the city gates, camels laden with frankincense, spices, and silk. The merchants know that Petra offers what the desert rarely does: water, and so the city thrives, not merely as a dwelling, but as a crossroads of empires. It was this mastery of water that allowed the Nabateans to control trade routes stretching across Arabia. Caravans needed rest stops, and those stops needed water. By establishing cities and stations with reliable supplies, the Nabateans became gatekeepers of commerce. They grew wealthy, not from conquering armies, but from their ability to turn scarcity into abundance. Water was their weapon, their shield, and their secret. The genius of their system becomes even more apparent when you compare it to the limitations of their environment. Unlike the Nile, which floods predictably each year, or the Tigris and Euphrates, which nourished Mesopotamian fields, the deserts of Arabia offered no such steady rhythm. The Nabateans could not rely on rivers. They had to invent a system that worked in spite of unpredictability. They did not simply adapt to the desert, they rewrote its rules. Yet, like so many forgotten technologies, this mastery eventually faded, as Petra's power declined, as Roman and Byzantine influences spread, and later, as Islamic empires shifted trade routes, the city dwindled. Without people to maintain them, channels clogged, cisterns collapsed, and terraces eroded. By the time Petra was rediscovered by the outside world in the 19th century, its waterworks were largely invisible, buried beneath centuries of neglect. The monumental facades survived, carved into stone and protected by their grandeur. But the quiet genius of the Nabateans, their pipes, their plaster, their patient channels, lay forgotten, overlooked by travelers, dazzled by temples and tombs. Modern archaeologists, however, are slowly bringing this forgotten knowledge back to light. Studies of Petra's hydrological system reveal just how advanced it was, rivaling and sometimes surpassing the engineering of more famous civilizations. Some scholars argue that the Nabateans' techniques of water harvesting and storage could hold lessons for us today, especially in an era of climate change, droughts, and growing water scarcity. The idea of capturing flash floods, of storing rain in underground cisterns, of minimizing evaporation. These are not just ancient practices, but possible blueprints for sustainable futures. There is also something deeply poetic about the Nabateans' relationship with water. For them, water was not only a resource, but a symbol of life's fragility. To preserve it, to honor it, was to acknowledge the precarious balance of existence in the desert. Their technology was not extravagant or wasteful, but careful, precise, and respectful of nature's rhythms. In this sense, their forgotten technology carries a wisdom that transcends its time. The reminder that survival often depends not on conquering nature, but on working in harmony with it. As you let your mind drift, imagine standing in Petra after a rare desert storm. The rain has stopped, and the air smells of wet earth and stone. Water trickles through channels carved centuries ago, guided into cisterns that wait patiently beneath the ground. For a moment, the desert blooms, and you understand how an ancient people once transformed scarcity into abundance. The Nabateans are long gone, their language and culture faded, but their whispers remain in the rock, in the quiet flow of water hidden from sight. And in that whisper, there is both a memory and a lesson that forgotten technologies sometimes hold. The keys not only to past civilizations, but also to our own uncertain future. Imagine holding a small corroded piece of bronze in your hand. To the casual observer, it might look like a jumble of gears, perhaps an odd artifact of some lost civilization. But this fragment, recovered from a shipwreck off the coast of the Greek island Antikythera in 1901, would eventually reveal one of the most astonishing forgotten technologies in human history. A mechanical device so sophisticated that it seemed centuries ahead of its time, known today as the Antikythera mechanism. It was a precision-engineered instrument designed to predict the movements of celestial bodies, eclipses, and even the cycles of the ancient Olympic Games. In essence, it was the world's first analog computer, a technology that disappeared from the world for over 1,000 years before the knowledge of such devices re-emerged in medieval clocks. Its story is one of ingenuity, loss, and rediscovery, a tale that reminds us how civilizations have often achieved brilliance, only for time to quietly obscure it. The Antikythera mechanism was found in a Roman-era shipwreck dating to around 7060 BCE. At first, it appeared as a mass of bronze fragments encrusted with centuries of corrosion. Scholars initially debated whether it was simply a decorative object, or perhaps a strange clockwork toy. But as X-rays and modern imaging techniques revealed its inner workings, a hidden world emerged. Inside the device were over 30 meshing gears, carefully cut with teeth, designed to rotate in precise ratios. Each gear had a specific purpose. Some tracked the cycles of the moon, accounting for its variable speed, while others calculated the positions of the sun and planets. The device could even predict solar and lunar eclipses years in advance. To think that the Greeks, living in a time of philosophy and early science, could conceive of and manufacture such a complex instrument is staggering. The mechanism was built to be hand-cranked, its dials and pointers moving in harmony to replicate the motions of the heavens. To modernize, it seems almost magical. Imagine turning a small handle and watching the hands slowly sweep across a dial, aligning not only with the zodiac, but also with the precise months of the lunar calendar. There is something poetic in this act, something that suggests a civilization in deep conversation with the cosmos. Unlike today's digital computers, which process information invisibly, the Antikythera mechanism made time and celestial motion tangible. One could literally see the universe move. It is particularly striking to consider how advanced this technology was compared to the historical timeline. Mechanical devices with similar levels of complexity did not reappear in Europe until the 14th century, when clockmaking began to flourish in medieval towns. For over a millennium, the knowledge of geared astronomical instruments seems to have vanished. The Antikythera mechanism, and perhaps other devices like it that have been lost to history, represents a peak of Greek engineering, a reminder that technology does not always progress linearly. Brilliant ideas can emerge, flourish briefly, and then vanish, leaving the world to rediscover them centuries later. The precision of the device is particularly astonishing given the tools available to its makers. Every gear had teeth cut to exact ratios, some with as many as 235 teeth, arranged to simulate the irregular motion of the lunar phenomenon known as the moon's elliptical orbit. Modern reconstructions show that the Greeks understood how to translate complex astronomical cycles into mechanical motion with a degree of sophistication that rivals modern gear making. It is not just a device, it is a demonstration of mathematical, observational, and engineering genius, all merged into a single, portable instrument. Yet, beyond its technical brilliance, the Antikythera mechanism tells a story about how humans have long sought to understand their place in the cosmos. For the Greeks, astronomy was intertwined with philosophy, religion, and daily life. Predicting eclipses was not mere spectacle, it had practical and spiritual significance. The Olympic Games, which followed a 4-year cycle, could be scheduled with reference to celestial events. Agricultural festivals, religious ceremonies, and even political decisions were connected to the motions of the heavens. The Antikythera mechanism was therefore both a tool and a bridge between science and society, allowing people to read the universe and, in some sense, to anticipate its rhythms. Its discovery also raises questions about what other technologies may have been lost to time. Was the Antikythera mechanism a solitary marvel, or part of a broader tradition of mechanical computation that has vanished almost completely? Ancient texts hint at other devices, descriptions of machines that calculate planetary positions or model the cosmos, yet none have survived in physical form, leaving only fragments, sketches, or the occasional cryptic reference. It is possible that the Greeks had an entire lineage of mechanical thinkers, engineers who understood gears, ratios, and celestial mathematics in ways that we are only beginning to comprehend. The device also reminds us of the fragility of human knowledge. The Romans, who may have acquired the mechanism through trade or conquest, did not preserve its techniques. The ship carrying it sank, hiding the Antikythera mechanism at the bottom of the sea for centuries. Once brilliant minds had designed and built it, the wheels turned for a brief moment in history, then paused until modern archaeology and imaging technology brought it back to life. In this way, the mechanism is both a triumph and a cautionary tale. No matter how advanced, knowledge can vanish if it is not recorded, shared, or maintained. When you picture the ancient Greeks using the mechanism, it is worth imagining their lives in full color. A scholar sits in a sunlit room, turning the small hand crank, watching the dial spin. He records the positions of the moon and sun on parchment, notes the timing of eclipses, and considers the harmony of the spheres. Outside, the streets of Athens buzz with merchants, philosophers, and citizens, while the scholar's device quietly captures the movements of distant planets, bridging the heavens and the human mind. There is a meditative quality to this, a rhythm that mirrors the slow, inexorable march of time. The Antikythera mechanism does not rush. It moves in cycles, in repetitions, reflecting the patient observation that defined Greek science. Even in our modern world, where digital computers simulate galaxies and satellites map the solar system with incredible precision, the Antikythera mechanism continues to fascinate. Engineers, reverse engineering it, have been amazed at the level of planning, precision, and understanding it embodies. The gears are arranged to model not just the solar year but also the lunar anomalies, something that even early medieval scholars struggled to calculate. In many ways, the device demonstrates that knowledge is not merely linear or cumulative. It is a river that can swell, recede, and sometimes disappear entirely, leaving the landscape seemingly barren until rediscovery. As you drift into sleep, imagine turning its small crank yourself. The hands sweep across engraved dials, the pointer marking the zodiac as the sun and moon trace their invisible paths. An eclipse is predicted months in advance, its timing precise. You feel the weight of the bronze, the smoothness of its motion, and in that moment, the past and present converge. The Antikythera mechanism is more than a device. It is a meditation on human curiosity, patience, and the quiet genius that often goes unnoticed. It is a reminder that civilizations do not live only in monuments or written texts. They also live in the cleverness hidden in bronze, the invisible networks of gears, the careful observations that allow a people to understand their world. The Antikythera mechanism is a whisper from the ancient world, a testament to what humans can achieve when observation, mathematics, and craftsmanship align. It is a story of brilliance, loss, and rediscovery, a story that invites us to consider what other marvels might lie beneath the surface, waiting to be remembered. Close your eyes and imagine the Andes Mountains, jagged peaks rising into the clouds, deep valleys carved by rivers that twist and roar through rugged terrain, and plateaus where the air is thin and cold. For most people, this landscape would seem almost impossible to traverse, let alone settle or govern. And yet, centuries ago, the Inca Empire managed not only to survive here, but to thrive, stretching their influence across thousands of miles of mountains, deserts, and jungles. One of the keys to their remarkable success was a technology that was simple in concept, but extraordinary in execution: the Inca road system, or Capac-On. It was not merely a series of paths, but a complex, integrated network of highways, bridges, and stairways that connected the vast empire, facilitating communication, trade, and administration across some of the most challenging terrain on Earth. And like so many forgotten technologies, the roads of the Inca demonstrate ingenuity, persistence, and a deep understanding of the natural world. Yet they are often overlooked in the story of human civilization. To understand the Inca roads, you first need to appreciate the scale and complexity of the empire. At its height in the early 16th century, the Inca controlled a territory stretching from modern-day Colombia to Chile, covering nearly 4,000 kilometers north to south. There were no draft animals like horses or oxen in the Andes, no wheeled carts, no modern engineering machinery. Everything had to be built with human labor, using simple tools, local materials, and extraordinary planning. And yet, the Incas created more than 25,000 miles of roads, linking cities, agricultural terraces, religious sites, and administrative centers. These roads were not straight or random. They were meticulously aligned, often following the contours of mountains, crossing rivers, and spiraling around cliffs. In some places, they climbed thousands of meters in elevation, carving steps into stone and laying foundations that could resist erosion and landslides. The roads were constructed with incredible attention to detail. In some regions, the Incas built stone-paved surfaces, carefully fitted together so tightly that not even a knife blade could slip between the stones. This was particularly important in highland areas, where the soil was loose and rain could wash away poorly constructed paths. In other areas, they used gravel or compacted earth, depending on the availability of materials and the anticipated use of the road. Drainage was carefully engineered. Channels diverted rainwater away from the surface, protecting the path from flooding and erosion. The Incas understood the forces of nature, and they built in harmony with the environment rather than against it. Bridges were another remarkable feature of the system. The Incas built suspension bridges from woven grass and reeds, sometimes spanning deep canyons hundreds of meters wide. These bridges required constant maintenance, and local communities were responsible for keeping them safe, demonstrating a social system integrated with technology. The bridges could be rebuilt within days if damaged, using nothing more than simple tools and traditional knowledge passed down through generations. Imagine standing on one of these rope bridges, the valley stretching below, the river roaring far beneath your feet. It might seem precarious, but for the Incas it was reliable, a vital link in an interconnected empire. The roads were not only physical connections, they were arteries of administration and communication. The Inca relied on a system of messengers known as chasqui, who ran along these roads in relay, carrying messages and quippers, knotted strings used to record information. A message could travel hundreds of miles in a single day, reaching the emperor or provincial administrators far faster than most would imagine possible without modern technology. The road network allowed the Inca to govern a vast and diverse empire efficiently, coordinating agriculture, military campaigns, and trade across mountains, deserts, and forests. Without these roads, the cohesion of the Inca state would have been unimaginable. Perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of the Inca roads is that they were built entirely without beasts of burden or wheeled vehicles. Every stone had to be carried by hand, every foundation laid by laborers, every bridge constructed from grass and rope. The organization and mobilization of labor was staggering. The mita system, a form of labor tax, ensured that communities contributed workers for the construction and maintenance of the roads. It was a labor-intensive process, but it created infrastructure that would last for centuries, a testament to both engineering skill and social organization. Some roads ascend dizzying heights, clinging to the sides of cliffs and winding around mountain spurs. In the Andes, altitudes can exceed 4,000 meters, and workers faced thin air, freezing temperatures, and treacherous terrain. Yet the Incas built stairways and switchbacks that allowed foot traffic to move efficiently, bringing people, goods, and armies across places that seemed inaccessible. Stones were cut and fitted in such a way that the pathways could survive earthquakes, which are common in the region. Many of these roads remain visible today, centuries after the fall of the Inca Empire, surviving landslides, floods, and centuries of neglect. The system was also remarkably adaptive. In the deserts of coastal Peru, roads had to withstand shifting sands and lack of rainfall, so the Incas used compacted gravel and built walls to protect paths from drifting dunes. In the cloud forests of the Amazon, they constructed raised causeways to keep trails dry and navigable despite constant rain. In each environment, the basic principles were the same: careful planning, local materials, knowledge of natural forces, and constant maintenance. The roads were not static. They evolved with the land, integrating human ingenuity with environmental realities. Despite their brilliance, these roads were largely forgotten after the Spanish conquest. The empire fell quickly, and the colonial rulers often ignored indigenous infrastructure, relying instead on their own roads and towns. Many Inca paths fell into disuse, and bridges and stairways crumbled. Yet the memory of the network persisted in local knowledge, and some paths continued to be used for centuries, linking villages and sacred sites. Modern archaeologists have only recently begun to map the full extent of the Capac One, revealing its astonishing scale and complexity. It is now recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a living testament to the engineering prowess of a civilization that thrived in one of the most challenging landscapes on Earth. Beyond the technical achievement, the Inca roads tell a story about the relationship between humans and their environment. The Incas did not simply impose themselves on the mountains. They worked with the land, understanding its rhythms, its dangers, and its possibilities. Their roads are an embodiment of that knowledge, a reminder that infrastructure is not merely about moving people or goods, but about creating a sustainable system that integrates social organization, environmental understanding, and long-term planning. As you imagine yourself walking along an Inca road, picture the mountains rising sharply on either side, the path winding like a ribbon carved into stone. You hear the rush of rivers below, the whisper of wind across terraces, the soft footfalls of messengers carrying messages, or traders moving goods. The path is rough but steady, constructed with precision and care. Bridges sway gently, held together by ropes braided from grass, spanning deep chasms where clouds cling to cliffs. Above you, peaks pierce the sky, while below, valleys hold cultivated terraces and villages, all connected by this remarkable network. The experience is both humbling and awe-inspiring, a reminder of human persistence and ingenuity in the face of extraordinary natural challenges. Even today, Walking on sections of the Cap-Aqueducts, one can feel the presence of those ancient builders. Every fitted stone, every curve of a stairway, every channel for drainage is a message from the past, telling us how humans once solved one of the most difficult engineering challenges imaginable. The roads of the Inca are not just relics, they are lessons in patience, collaboration, and harmony with nature. They remind us that true engineering is not always about grand machines or modern technology, but about understanding the world around you and finding solutions that endure. As the sun sets over the Andes, imagine the Inca roads bathed in golden light, stretching across mountains and valleys, invisible from afar, but essential to life within the empire. Picture messengers running along these paths, their breath visible in the cold air, carrying messages that maintain the unity of a civilization. The roads are silent now, yet they carry echoes of the past, the footsteps of builders, travelers, and dreamers who carved a network of endurance into stone. They remind us that even in the harshest landscapes, human ingenuity can thrive, creating structures that connect people, ideas, and the world itself. Imagine the coast of Constantinople at dusk. The sky is streaked with red and gold, the waters of the Bosporus reflecting the fading light. Ships are anchored in the harbor, their sails furled, their crews weary from weeks at sea. Suddenly, a ship appears on the horizon, its enemy approaching with intent to conquer, to plunder, to burn. But the defenders of the Byzantine Empire are ready. From the city's walls, Greek fire is hurled, and the attackers' ships erupt in flames that cling stubbornly to wood and water alike. Panic spreads as men scramble to douse the unquenchable blaze. Greek fire was not merely a weapon, it was a tool of survival, a secret technology so effective and terrifying that it became legendary, shrouded in mystery for centuries. Its recipe was guarded closely by the Byzantines, and to this day, no one knows the exact formula. In a way, it is a story about ingenuity, secrecy, and the lost knowledge that shaped civilizations. Greek fire was first used in the 7th century during the reign of Emperor Constantine IV. As the Byzantine Empire faced threats from Arab fleets and other invaders, the weapon was a liquid incendiary, capable of burning even on water, a quality that made it particularly devastating in naval warfare. Imagine being a sailor in that era, seeing your ship suddenly engulfed in flames that could not be extinguished by water, watching as panic and chaos spread across the deck. The psychological impact of Greek fire was as powerful as its physical effects. It struck fear into enemies, often causing fleets to retreat before the weapon was even deployed. It was both a tool of strategy and a symbol of the empire's technological edge. The exact composition of Greek fire remains unknown. Ancient texts hint at a combination of petroleum, quicklime, sulfur, and other flammable materials, but no surviving recipe has been conclusively identified. This secrecy was intentional. The Byzantines treated the knowledge as a closely guarded state secret, passed down only to select individuals. The delivery systems themselves were equally ingenious. Handheld siphons, mounted tubes on ships, and grenades filled with the incendiary allowed for targeted deployment. Some historians describe tubes resembling modern flamethrowers, capable of projecting a stream of liquid fire toward enemy vessels. The combination of chemical knowledge, engineering, and tactical deployment makes Greek fire a remarkable example of lost technology, a weapon that disappeared almost entirely after the fall of Constantinople. Its effectiveness relied not only on the chemical composition, but also on the skill of those who used it. Operators had to mix the materials carefully, often just before battle, balancing the volatile ingredients to maximize flammability without endangering themselves. The Byzantines trained crews to handle the weapon with precision, ensuring that it could be used repeatedly and efficiently in naval engagements. Imagine the focus required. A sailor standing on the deck, flame and smoke swirling around, the roar of battle echoing off the walls, yet maintaining calm as he aims the siphon, projecting a stream of fire across the water. This combination of technology and human skill was as vital as the weapon itself. Greek fire was not only a defensive tool, but also a statement of ingenuity. The Byzantines were surrounded by rival empires and faced threats on multiple fronts. To survive, they had to innovate constantly, using available materials and knowledge to create an advantage. Greek fire demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of chemistry and engineering centuries ahead of its time. The Byzantines recognized the potential of natural resources, petroleum seepages, pitch, sulfurant transformed them into something more than fuel. They turned them into a weapon that shaped history, defending one of the world's most enduring cities and influencing naval warfare for generations. The psychological impact of Greek fire cannot be overstated. Sailors and soldiers often fled from it, even before it could reach them. Legends describe entire fleets retreating in terror, unable to comprehend how fire could burn on water. This fear was amplified by the secrecy surrounding the weapon. Enemies had no way to study or replicate it, leaving them vulnerable and uncertain. Greek fire became a symbol not only of military might, but also of the mysterious intelligence and resourcefulness of the Byzantines. In a sense, it was an early form of deterrence, a technology that influenced behavior as much as it inflicted damage. Despite its power, Greek fire eventually disappeared from common use. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453, the knowledge of its production and deployment was largely lost. Attempts to recreate it in later centuries were largely unsuccessful, demonstrating that this was not merely a simple combination of flammable ingredients, but a sophisticated, carefully engineered technology. Like many lost technologies, Greek fire reminds us that mastery often depends as much on knowledge transfer, skill, and context as on materials themselves. Without the social and institutional framework of the Byzantine Empire, the weapon could not survive, no matter how brilliant its design. When you imagine the use of Greek fire, picture the city's defenders watching from the walls, their faces lit by the eerie glow of the flames. The attacking fleet presses forward, oblivious to the danger, until a sudden torrent of fire leaps across the water. Wood crackles and smoke rises, sails ignite, and the tide of battle shifts instantly. The scene is both terrifying and mesmerizing, a moment where technology, human skill, and strategic planning converge in a spectacle that shapes history. The memory of such moments lingered in stories and chronicles for centuries, inspiring awe and fear in generations long after the weapon itself had vanished. Greek fire also reveals the broader principle of forgotten technologies. Sometimes the true power of a civilization lies not in what is visible, but in what is hidden. While monumental architecture and art may endure, subtle innovations, chemical, mechanical, or tactical, can be equally transformative, yet vanish without a trace. Greek fire shaped the fate of empires, determined the survival of cities, and influenced warfare across the Mediterranean. Yet its secrets are largely gone. What remains is the impact, the resilience of Constantinople, the strategies of its defenders, and the myths that grew around this mysterious weapon. Even in the modern era, Greek fire continues to fascinate historians, chemists, and engineers. Experiments with reconstructed formulas reveal its destructive potential, and the ingenuity of its deployment demonstrates an advanced understanding of both materials science and human psychology. Yet the true formula, the complete combination of substances, may remain forever lost, a reminder that knowledge is fragile, and even brilliant innovations can disappear without careful preservation and transmission. Imagine, as you drift into sleep, the smoke curling from a Byzantine ship, the fire glowing unnaturally bright against the darkening waters, the fear in the eyes of attackers who have never seen anything like it. The defenders of the empire stand calmly, trained and prepared, using knowledge and skill to transform nature itself into a weapon. Greek fire is a story of brilliance, secrecy, and the power of human ingenuity, a story of a forgotten technology that shaped the fate of an empire and reminds us how fleeting and precious knowledge can be. In reflecting on Greek fire, consider the lives of those who wielded it. Sailors, engineers, and soldiers trained for years, mastering a dangerous substance that could burn friend and foe alike. Their understanding of chemistry, fluid dynamics, and strategy combined with courage and discipline to produce a weapon that seemed almost supernatural. In this, Greek fire is more than a weapon. It is a testament to the human capacity for invention under pressure, and to the ways in which necessity drives technology. The Byzantines faced existential threats, and they responded with brilliance, creating something both practical and awe-inspiring. The story of Greek fire also teaches patience and reverence for ingenuity. In a world obsessed with visible monuments and tangible legacies, it is easy to overlook technologies that vanish, leaving only traces in texts or ruins. Yet these hidden innovations often determine outcomes far beyond their apparent scale. Greek fire shaped the survival of Constantinople for centuries, influenced naval tactics, and left a legacy that continues to captivate minds today. It is a reminder that true technological mastery is as much about insight and strategy as it is about materials and tools, and that even the most effective inventions can be lost if not carefully preserved. As you let your mind wander, picture the Bosporus at night, the waters shimmering under the moon, the city's walls illuminated by torchlight. Across the harbor, enemy ships press forward, unaware of the danger. Then, a sudden eruption of flame leaps from Byzantine decks, clinging to wood, water, and sail. The smell of burning pitch and sulfur fills the air. Panic ensues, men shout, and the tide of battle shifts in an instant. And yet, somewhere in the chaos, sailors and engineers move with calm precision, guided by knowledge, skill, and the quiet understanding that this weapon, this forgotten technology, may determine the fate of an empire. Greek fire reminds us that some of the most remarkable technologies are not those preserved in museums or textbooks, but those that survive only in memory and impact. It is a story of creativity, secrecy, and the delicate transmission of knowledge, a story that whispers across centuries, teaching us about ingenuity, human courage, and the ephemeral nature of innovation. And as you drift into sleep, let the image of flames dancing across water, of ships both destroyed and defended, linger in your imagination, a testament to the hidden brilliance of a forgotten civilization. Imagine holding a sword that seems almost alive. Its edge glints like liquid silver, sharp enough to slice through cloth, wood, or even metal with ease. The steel itself shimmers with wavy patterns, intricate and mesmerizing, almost like water frozen in motion. This is Damascus steel, the legendary metal of ancient blades, a technology whose origins and secrets were lost over centuries, yet whose impact shaped civilizations. Its reputation spread across empires, carried by traders and warriors, and its very name became synonymous with unmatched craftsmanship, strength, and beauty. The story of Damascus steel is not just about metallurgy. It is about human ingenuity, trade, culture, and the fragile nature of knowledge. The production of Damascus steel began in the Near East, possibly as early as the first millennium CE, though its origins are intertwined with earlier Indian and Middle Eastern metallurgical traditions. The steel was originally produced from Wootz ingots, a high-carbon crucible steel imported from India. These ingots contained a carefully balanced mix of carbon, iron, and trace elements, which gave the finished blade extraordinary properties. But the secret lay not only in the raw material but in the forging process, which involved repeated heating, hammering, folding, and cooling in precise sequences. The blacksmiths of the medieval Middle East understood, perhaps intuitively, how to manipulate the crystalline structure of the steel to achieve both toughness and flexibility. What made Damascus steel remarkable was its combination of qualities. Unlike ordinary iron or early steel, which could be brittle or soft, Damascus blades were resilient and sharp. They could bend without breaking, hold an edge longer than other metals, and withstand repeated blows in battle. The visual effect of flowing, wavy patterns, known as watered steel, was a byproduct of the forging technique. Carbon-rich bands alternated with purer iron, creating lines that shimmered in the light. These patterns were not only aesthetically stunning, but also indicated the structural integrity of the blade, a testament to the skill of the blacksmiths who shaped them. The reputation of Damascus steel spread far and wide. Crusaders returning from the Middle East marveled at the blades of Muslim warriors, describing swords that could cut through a helmet or split a spear without losing their edge. Traders carried Damascus blades along the Silk Road, spreading their fame across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Kings and warriors coveted them, not only for their utility, but as symbols of power, prestige, and technological mastery. To possess a Damascus sword was to hold a piece of innovation, an object that combined science, art, and practical effectiveness in a single form. Despite its renown, the secret of producing true Damascus steel eventually disappeared. By the 18th century, the original techniques were largely lost, and attempts to reproduce the metal often fell short. Historians and metallurgists have speculated on the reasons. The process required precise control of temperature, carbon content, and cooling rates, knowledge that was closely guarded and transmitted orally or within guilds. Wars, trade disruptions, and the decline of traditional metallurgical centers may have contributed to the loss. Additionally, the specific sources and Wootz ingots that provided the chemical basis for Damascus steel became scarce or were no longer imported. The combination of secret knowledge, specialized materials, and meticulous craftsmanship proved impossible to preserve in a changing world. Modern scientists have attempted to recreate Damascus steel, using electron microscopes and metallurgical analysis to understand the patterns and properties of surviving blades. They have identified the presence of cementite, a compound of iron and carbon, which forms microstructures called carbide networks. These networks give the steel its distinctive patterns and mechanical strength. Some experimental blades come close to the originals in appearance and performance. Yet many experts agree that the lost knowledge of exact heating cycles, hammering techniques, and subtle environmental factors may never be fully recovered. Damascus steel remains, in a way, a bridge across time, a lost art that continues to inspire awe and study. Beyond its technical brilliance, Damascus steel reflects the cultural and economic systems that allowed such innovation to flourish. The Middle East, during the medieval period, was a hub of trade, scholarship, and craftsmanship. Blacksmiths were not only artisans, but also technologists, integrating observation, experimentation, and tradition to create materials that exceeded the capabilities of most contemporary societies. The success of Damascus steel depended not only on individual skill, but on networks of trade that supplied raw materials, the patronage of rulers and merchants, and the transmission of knowledge across generations. In other words, it was a technology embedded within civilization itself, inseparable from the social and economic context that made it possible. Consider the daily life of a Damascus steel smith. He works in a modest forge, the air thick with smoke and the sharp scent of hot metal. Flames lick the edges of a crucible containing Wootz ingots. He carefully monitors the temperature, striking the metal repeatedly with a hammer, folding it over itself, quenching it in controlled sequences of water or oil. Each movement is precise, learned through years of apprenticeship. Sweat drips onto the anvil, sparks fly, and the clang of hammer on steel echoes across the workshop. Every blade carries the imprint of this labor, every wave in the metal a record of human skill, intuition, and patience. This is technology in its most intimate form, a conversation between human and material, guided by knowledge and experience. The applications of Damascus steel were not limited to swords. Daggers, knives, spearheads, and even tools were crafted with similar techniques. In battle, the steel could mean the difference between life and death. In everyday life, it represented durability and reliability. It was a technology that combined utility, art, and prestige, rare convergence that elevated it beyond mere material. Even today, the surviving blades are treasured in museums and private collections, their wavy patterns captivating both engineers and art lovers. The story of Damascus steel also highlights the fragility of technological knowledge. Unlike written texts or monumental structures, which can survive centuries, hands-on skills and oral traditions are vulnerable. A single disrupted apprenticeship, a closed workshop, or a lost supply chain can erase generations of expertise. The disappearance of Damascus steel reminds us that progress is not always linear, and that brilliance can be forgotten, only to be partially reconstructed centuries later. Imagine, then, standing in a medieval market, the sun glinting off a Damascus blade, displayed in the hands of a merchant. Warriors from distant lands admire its craftsmanship, and travelers marvel at its beauty and strength. Each pattern in the steel tells a story of war mined in distant lands, of long hours in the forge, of hands guided by knowledge passed down through generations. The blade is not merely a weapon, but a symbol of human ingenuity, a testament to what a civilization can achieve when skill, observation, and creativity converge. In reflecting on Damascus steel, it is worth noting that it is not simply a technological curiosity. It also embodies human values. Precision, patience, experimentation, and dedication are all woven into every blade. The steel teaches that technology is not merely functional, it can also inspire, connect, and endure. Even centuries after its disappearance, it continues to influence metallurgy, materials, science, and even popular imagination. It is a reminder that the past holds treasures not only in monuments and texts, but also in the quiet brilliance of lost crafts. As you drift into sleep, picture the smith's workshop at dusk, the glowing metal reflecting in his eyes, the rhythm of hammer on steel blending with the crackle of fire. Each strike shapes the metal, and with it, the destiny of warriors and empires. The waves in the steel shimmer as if alive, telling stories of distant lands, long journeys, and the hands that forged them. Damascus steel is not just a material. It is a narrative of ingenuity, resilience, and the fragile persistence of knowledge of forgotten technology that continues to echo across time, reminding us of what humans can achieve when skill, curiosity, and artistry align. When we think about ancient civilizations, we often imagine them as vulnerable to the raw forces of nature, their cities built of wood, clay, and stone, standing at the mercy of fire, flood, and storm. Yet if we step back into the quiet corridors of history, we uncover stories that suggest our ancestors had not only an awareness of these dangers, but also clever ways to protect themselves against them. One of the most fascinating of these nearly forgotten technologies is the creation and use of fireproof materials, a field where myths, religious rituals, and surprisingly advanced science all seemed to meet. The ability to resist fire was not merely a curiosity. In many cases, it was tied to survival, architecture, and even the sacred. As we wander through this story, we will find traces of strange fabrics, miraculous minerals, and early attempts at taming fire, not just for warmth or cooking, but for resilience and awe. We might begin in ancient Egypt, where the priests and temple workers often performed rituals involving flame, smoke, and incense. Some records suggest that cloths treated with special mineral solutions could withstand the heat of fire. And although no surviving samples exist, there are later echoes of this in the writings of Greek and Roman authors. In Egypt, temples often contained fire altars, and the symbolism of flame was tied to eternal life and the gods themselves. To have a fabric or a surface that resisted burning may have carried spiritual weight, as if the object had absorbed something divine. One can imagine a priest lifting a cloth, setting it into the flame of a lamp, and pulling it back unscathed, a performance that must have seemed like proof of divine favor to those watching, whether purely ritual or partly practical. This notion of protecting materials against fire was a knowledge seeded early in the Nile Valley. Traveling forward to ancient Greece, we encounter a mineral that would come to dominate the story of fireproofing for centuries: asbestos. Today, the word calls up thoughts of danger, illness, and regulation, but in the ancient world, asbestos was something close to magical. The Greeks mined it from the earth, noting its fibrous structure, and quickly discovered its extraordinary resistance to flames. Woven into cloth, asbestos could create napkins, wicks, and ceremonial garments that did not burn. The Greek word for it meant inextinguishable, a clue to how striking this property must have been in a society where fire consumed almost everything it touched. According to some accounts, these fireproof cloths were used at banquets. After being soiled, they were thrown directly into the fire. Emerging clean and intact, the stains burned away while the fabric survived. Imagine sitting at a table, watching a servant toss a dirty napkin into the flames, only to retrieve it moments later, renewed. The sense of wonder, mingled with practicality, must have left a deep impression. The Romans, inheriting and expanding Greek practices, also valued asbestos, particularly for ritual uses. Some sources suggest that emperors' burial shrouds were woven with asbestos, so that when the body was cremated, the ashes of the deceased could be easily separated from the fireproof fibers of the cloth. Others describe its use in perpetual lamps that burned in temples or shrines. The asbestos wick seemingly immune to destruction, sustaining a flame that might have been interpreted as eternal. Roman naturalists, like Pliny the Elder, wrote about this substance with both fascination and unease, noting its durability but also the strange cost of mining it, as those who worked with asbestos often became ill. Here we see a haunting foreshadowing of the dangers that only much later became widely known. A reminder that forgotten technologies sometimes fall away, not because they lacked brilliance, but because they carried unseen consequences. Moving eastward, we find China developing its own relationship with fire-resistant materials. By the Han Dynasty, asbestos was known and imported along the Silk Road. Chinese records describe cloths that could be washed in flames, which must have appeared miraculous in a culture where fire also held ritual and symbolic meaning. In some cases, these cloths were even given as tribute gifts to emperors, emphasizing their rarity and wonder. Yet beyond the spectacle, China also pursued practical forms of fireproofing in architecture. Some urban centers, prone to devastating fires, began using mixtures of clay, plaster, and mineral additives to coat wooden beams and walls, an early effort at fire retardancy that anticipated modern building practices. It is one thing to marvel at a fabric that survives flame, but another to recognize that entire communities were experimenting with ways to resist fire on a larger scale, protecting homes and temples alike. Further along the Silk Road, in India and Central Asia, traditions of fireproofing also took root. Some Hindu rituals involve fireproof materials, again often tied to the divine and the eternal. There are mentions of fabrics believed to be imbued with fire-resistant properties, sometimes associated with magical or alchemical practices. In regions rich with minerals, artisans and priests may have experimented with substances like alum, a compound later widely used for its fire-retardant qualities. Alum could be dissolved and applied to cloth, stiffening it slightly, but making it less likely to catch flame, a trick that endured across cultures. What began as mystical ritual perhaps slowly became practical science, carried along trade networks, and remembered in the margins of old manuscripts. Meanwhile, in Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire continued to preserve and adapt fireproofing knowledge, but they pushed it in a far more military direction. One of the most notorious forgotten technologies tied to fire was Greek fire, a mysterious incendiary substance that burned fiercely even on water. Although its exact formula remains unknown, some scholars suspect that elements of fireproofing materials were part of the innovation. Containers, siphons, or fabrics resistant to flames may have been critical in storing or projecting the substance. The Byzantines treated Greek fire as a state secret, a technology of terror and defense, and while the focus was on harnessing fire as a weapon, the ability to handle it safely would have required its own hidden knowledge. In this way, fireproofing slipped into the shadows, tied to strategies of empire and war. What unites all of these examples is the interplay between awe and application. Fireproof fabrics and coatings were not merely practical, they were performative, symbols of mastery over one of nature's most destructive forces. In many cultures, fire was tied to the gods, to Hestia in Greece, to Agni in India, to Agni's blazing sun in Egypt. To resist fire was, in some sense, to touch the divine. Thus, the survival of a cloth or structure against flame was not just an act of chemistry, but a kind of miracle, reinforcing cultural beliefs and political power. Yet behind these performances lay clever experimentation, a human curiosity that pushed people to soak fabrics in minerals, to test stones against flames, and to observe which substances endured. Over time, however, much of this knowledge faded. Asbestos continued to be known but gradually lost its luster, especially as its supply dwindled and its dangers became more apparent. Other fireproofing methods, tied to ritual secrecy or localized traditions, were never fully recorded, leaving us with tantalizing hints rather than clear instructions. Some techniques may have been guarded as sacred knowledge, others simply abandoned. As societies shifted, buildings changed, and new priorities emerged. By the medieval period in Europe, fireproofing had largely narrowed to practical coatings, lime plasters, clay washes, and mineral mixes used in towns prone to fires. The spectacle of fireproof cloths tossed into flames had become less common, their memory fading into travelers' tales and half-believed stories. Yet traces of this lost world still linger. Medieval alchemists occasionally mention fabrics treated to withstand flames, suggesting that at least some whispers of the old methods survived. Travelers returning from the East brought stories of miraculous cloths, sometimes dismissed as exaggerations, but perhaps rooted in actual traditions of mineral-treated textiles. Even into the Renaissance, experiments with alum, vinegar, and other compounds on fabrics show a continuing, if fragmentary, line of curiosity. In a sense, the ancient dream of fireproofing never disappeared. It merely retreated into obscurity until modern chemistry reclaimed and formalized it. As we drift with this story, we might pause to reflect on how ancient people must have felt when they first discovered these materials. Imagine the miner pulling fibrous stone from the earth, watching it twist into a thread, and then realizing it would not burn. Imagine the servant at a Roman banquet, instructed to throw a stained cloth into the fire, heart racing as guests looked on, before retrieving it spotless and whole. Imagine the Chinese envoy presenting a fireproof cloth to the emperor, the court marveling at its resilience as it emerged unscathed from the brazier. These moments, half practical, half theatrical, remind us of the power of forgotten technologies to stir wonder as much as utility. The forgotten fireproofing of antiquity belongs to that strange category of technologies, both ahead of their time and, in some ways, too costly to endure. Today, modern science gives us fire-retardant fabrics, coatings, and construction materials that owe something to these early experiments. But the deeper lesson may be in the cultural imagination they shaped. To resist fire was to brush against immortality, to tame one of the most feared and sacred forces of life. And so these old methods, whether through asbestos fibers, alum-soaked cloths, or mineral-coated walls, carried not only the weight of survival, but also the aura of the miraculous. As we close our eyes on this segment, we might see flames flickering gently, not as a threat but as a dance. Somewhere in the past, a cloth draped in fire emerges unscathed, a lamp's wick burns without end, and a city wall glows faintly in the firelight but does not ignite. The forgotten technology of fireproofing lingers in these visions, a reminder of how humans have always longed, not just to endure fire, but to make peace with it, to turn destruction into endurance, and to preserve what otherwise would be lost to ash. Imagine standing in the center of an old stone amphitheater, the air still cool from the night, the first light of dawn beginning to creep over the horizon. The seating arcs above you like rippling waves carved into the earth, tier after tier rising high. And as you glance around, you cannot help but notice how carefully it is all shaped. At first, it feels like nothing more than stone and space. Yet, if you were to clear your throat or whisper softly, your voice would travel with an uncanny clarity. You would hear it bouncing back to you, magnified, as though invisible hands were carrying it along every curve and line of the place. And if someone else, perched high on the upper steps, spoke a quiet word, you might hear them as though they were only an arm's length away. This is not magic, though it must have seemed like it to those who first experienced it. It is a forgotten art, the mastery of acoustics, an ancient technology that shaped not only the way people built, but also how they gathered, communicated, and shared their stories. Civilizations long before microphones and speakers had already discovered ways of bending sound, guiding it, and amplifying it. To them, the spoken word was sacred, whether it was a prayer rising into the heavens, a political decree meant for a restless crowd, or a poet's verse carried on the evening air. To reach the ears of many without strain was to command authority and bind people together. And so, they crafted theaters, temples, chambers, and halls with precision that is as breathtaking as any pyramid or aqueduct. For much of history, sound was not an invisible force left to chance. It was something to be harnessed. The Greeks, perhaps more than anyone, mastered this early art. Their amphitheaters, many of which still stand today, are more than ruins of stone. They are monuments to an ancient science of listening. At Epidaurus, for example, the theater carved into the hillside could hold thousands of people. Yet even the softest words spoken at the center stage carried to the very top seats. Modern acoustic engineers have puzzled over this, measuring the geometry, the slope, the material of the seating. They discovered that the rows of limestone benches filtered out low-frequency background sounds like the rustle of the crowd, or the breeze while amplifying the sharper tones of the human voice. Whether the builders fully understood the physics in the way we describe it today, or whether they simply learned through careful trial and error, the result was the same. They built places where sound itself became architecture. But the Greeks were not alone. The Romans carried these techniques further, embedding them into vast arenas and domed halls. The Pantheon in Rome, with its immense circular chamber, was more than a place of worship. It was also an acoustic marvel, where voices seemed to linger and multiply, filling the air with resonance. Priests and rulers understood the power of such effects. To be heard clearly in a great space was not just a matter of communication, it was authority made, tangible. The voice became larger than the individual, carried on the design of stone and curve, turned almost divine. And for the ordinary people seated in the galleries or gathered in the courtyards, it was a reminder of their place within something greater than themselves. In India, 2 temples were designed with acoustics in mind. The chants of priests echoed against intricately carved walls, and even a single struck bell would reverberate across the chambers, its sound lingering in a way that seemed to dissolve the boundary between earth and spirit. The builders aligned stone, carved domes, and placed corridors so that vibrations traveled in deliberate paths. Worshippers felt immersed in sound, not just as listeners, but as participants within a space that magnified their voices into something beyond the human. These were not accidents of construction, but careful choices, where architecture and sound merged to create experiences that were both practical and spiritual. Some examples are even more mysterious. In Peru, the Incas built structures with stones so finely joined that not even a blade could slip between them. But what is often overlooked is how some of their temples and plazas played with sound. At Machu Picchu, for instance, certain plazas seem to carry echoes with unusual strength, amplifying voices across distances. In other Incan sites, carved stones appear to mimic the shapes of instruments, their surfaces producing tones when struck. Sound, in these places, was not simply background, it was woven into the living fabric of daily ritual. One of the strangest and most enchanting examples of forgotten acoustics is found in what are known as whispering galleries. These are circular or elliptical chambers where a whisper spoken at one side can be heard distinctly at another, far away, as though the walls themselves were carrying the secret. Today, we might think of St. Paul's Cathedral in London, where tourists still test the effect by whispering into the curved walls of its great dome. But this principle was known long before. Ancient builders, whether in Persia, Greece, or Mesoamerica, shaped spaces where sound behaved in ways that seemed uncanny. Imagine the awe such places would have inspired. A priest whispers at one end of the chamber, and a listener far away hears the words with eerie clarity, while those standing closer hear almost nothing. Was it divine communication? Was it the voice of the gods? To those who experienced it, the boundary between the natural and the supernatural blurred. Yet behind the wonder was design, an understanding of how curves and surfaces guided sound. The forgotten part of this story lies not in the survival of the ruins, many of which we can still visit, but in the loss of the cultural knowledge that animated them. Today, we reconstruct these spaces with computer models and instruments, but the ancient builders did so with nothing more than experience, patience, and intuition. They listened, they tested, they shaped stone until it spoke back to them in the way they desired. In an age where we take microphones, speakers, and amplifiers for granted, it is easy to forget that for most of human history, the human voice was fragile, bound by distance and drowned by noise. Yet, through these forgotten technologies of acoustics, whole civilizations managed to give voice to thousands at once. Think of what that meant for society. In the Greek amphitheater, a single actor could carry a play's story to 10,000 people. In a Roman basilica, a senator could sway a restless crowd without shouting. In a temple in India, a priest could call out chants that enveloped worshippers in resonance, making them feel that the divine itself was speaking through the walls. In each case, acoustics were not just technical tricks, but tools of unity and power. They shaped the very possibility of shared experience. Even the myths surrounding sound reflect this forgotten fascination. Ancient Chinese texts tell of bells whose tones could travel across valleys, summoning entire communities. Legends in Central America speak of stone trumpets or flutes carved into walls, their notes echoing through plazas. In these stories, whether literal or symbolic, we see the same idea. Sound was more than vibration in the air. It was a force to be shaped, a bridge between humans and their gods, their leaders, and each other. What is remarkable is how much of this knowledge was forgotten in the centuries that followed. As empires collapsed and new ones rose, the fine art of acoustic design was often neglected. Medieval builders, for instance, sometimes created churches where echoes muddled voices rather than amplified them, where chants became distorted instead of clear. The secrets of the ancients had slipped away, hidden in their stones. It was only in the modern era, with the rise of science and acoustic engineering, that we began to rediscover what they had known all along. That sound has rules, that space can guide it, and that a well-built chamber can transform a whisper into something almost eternal. When we visit these ancient places today, we often marvel at their size, their beauty, their endurance. Yet if you stand quietly, listen carefully, and perhaps speak a single word, you may hear something more. The walls remember. The stones carry voices across centuries. The amphitheater at Epidaurus, the domes of old temples, the plazas of lost cities, they are not silent ruins, but instruments waiting to be played. They remind us of a forgotten technology, one that did not require wires or electricity, but only patience, observation, and reverence for the mysterious ways of sound. And so, The whispering walls of history still speak, if we let them. They tell us that civilizations rose not only on the strength of stone and sword, but also on the subtle art of being heard. They remind us that even the quietest voice, when guided by the right design, can reach across distance and time. If you have ever wandered into the ancient city of Petra, even in your imagination, you know that it rises out of the reddish-pink sandstone cliffs like a mirage. Its monumental facades carved into rock seem to promise permanence and grandeur. Yet, what is most astonishing about this city is not only its temples or tombs, but the fact that it thrived in one of the harshest, driest regions of the ancient world. How did a city with tens of thousands of inhabitants, built amid unforgiving desert mountains, manage to sustain life for centuries? The answer lies in a forgotten mastery of hydraulic engineering. Petra was not only a city of stone, it was a city of water. Its survival depended on ingenuity that most of us today would overlook. The Nabateans, the people who built Petra, understood that controlling water was the same as controlling life. They lived in a desert where rain was scarce and unpredictable, falling just a few times a year, and where flash floods could be both destructive and fleeting. Instead of resigning themselves to these extremes, the Nabateans designed one of the most sophisticated water management systems in antiquity, channeling seasonal rains, diverting flash floods, storing every precious drop, and distributing it across the city with remarkable precision. This hidden system beneath and around Petra is what truly allowed its people to flourish. Imagine arriving at Petra during its peak. Around the 1st century CE, you would approach through the Sick, a narrow winding gorge that stretches for more than a kilometer. Sheer cliffs rise above you, the walls so close at points that only a few beams of sunlight make their way down. As you walk, you might notice something curious cut into the walls, narrow channels carved neatly along the rock. These are the Nabateans' conduits, subtle but essential. They gathered the rainfall and spring water from the surrounding hills, channeling it safely down the Sick, without allowing torrents to flood the passageway. Along the conduits, terracotta pipes were fitted to carry water smoothly, with small settling basins built at intervals to trap debris. By the time you reached the heart of Petra, the water had been slowed, cleaned, and guided exactly where it was needed. This is the kind of quiet brilliance that people rarely see in the romantic pictures of Petra's facades. The survival of the city depended on these hidden lines in the rock. The Nabateans were desert traders, people who had mastered mobility and survival. Before they settled permanently in Petra, they roamed the Arabian deserts, moving with caravans of incense, spices, and goods that connected southern Arabia to the Mediterranean. That nomadic heritage shaped their mindset. In the desert, water is everything, and the Nabateans learned to observe the land like few others. They saw where seasonal watis, the dry riverbeds, would flood, and where natural basins might collect runoff. They understood the shapes of rocks and slopes, predicting how rain would move across the landscape. When they built Petra, they brought this deep environmental knowledge with them and transformed it into a permanent network of engineered control. Nothing was left to chance. Every drop that fell was anticipated, redirected, stored, and rationed. At the heart of this system were dozens of them were cut directly into the rock, large chambers hidden beneath the city, protected from the scorching sun. Rainwater and diverted floods would flow into these underground reservoirs, sealed carefully with plaster to prevent seepage. Some cisterns were small and served individual households, while others were massive public reserves that could hold tens of thousands of cubic meters. Archaeologists studying them today are still astonished at the precision of their construction. The plaster linings are so fine and resilient that they remain visible even after 2 millennia. Inside, water stayed cool, fresh, and protected from evaporation. These cisterns meant that even during long dry seasons, Petra had a steady reserve to draw from. Yet storing water was only half the challenge. The Nabateans also needed to move it across their mountainous terrain to where people actually lived, worked, and farmed. For this, they constructed kilometers of ceramic pipelines, often buried underground or fitted into rock-cut channels. The pipes were not laid haphazardly. They followed careful gradients, ensuring a constant but controlled flow. To steep a slope, and the water would surge with destructive force. To shallow, and it would stagnate. The Nabateans achieved a balance so precise that modern hydraulic engineers studying the remains are impressed by their understanding of fluid dynamics. Without the mathematics we rely on today, One of their cleverest innovations was the use of pressure pipes. In some places, water had to be carried across valleys and uneven ground. Instead of building elaborate aqueduct bridges, as the Romans did, the Nabateans sometimes employed a system that used gravity itself. They set pipes descending sharply into the valley, then rising again up the opposite side. This created a pressurized siphon effect, pushing the water uphill. Such pressure pipes were rare in the ancient world, and Petra holds some of the best evidence of them. It is a reminder that the Nabateans were not simply borrowing Roman technology, they were adapting, experimenting, and innovating in ways that suited their environment. This system of channels, pipes, and cisterns supported more than just daily drinking water. It allowed Petra to bloom, quite literally, into a city of gardens. Archaeologists have uncovered terraces and basins that once held lush vegetation. Grapevines, date palms, and aromatic plants were likely cultivated here. Imagine the shock of stepping out of the barren desert into a city where trees shaded the courtyards, where fountains may have flowed in the plazas, and where water trickled through carved spouts into basins for ritual and leisure. Travelers from far-off lands would have been astonished. To see greenery in such a desolate place would have seemed miraculous, a testament to the wealth and ingenuity of the Nabateans. Water was not only practical, it was symbolic of prosperity and power. Petra's hydraulic system also made it a vital stop for traders. Caravans arriving from Arabia and beyond could rest, refill their skins, and resupply, before continuing toward the Mediterranean. This capacity for abundance in the desert made Petra an indispensable hub on the trade routes. Wealth poured in, and with it came the resources to build the monumental architecture we admire today. But at its foundation, it was water that made everything possible. Without the hidden channels and cisterns, those carved facades would have been lifeless decorations in an empty canyon. Yet what makes Petra's system particularly fascinating is that it was resilient in more ways than one. The Nabateans knew their environment was unpredictable. Droughts were always a threat, and flash floods could sweep away entire structures. So they built redundancies. Multiple channels carried water from different sources, ensuring that if one path was damaged, others could still function. Spillways and diversion dams were constructed to redirect sudden torrents away from vulnerable areas, protecting both people and infrastructure. Water was distributed not just for the elite, but for the whole community, with public cisterns and fountains positioned throughout the city. This careful, inclusive planning suggests a society deeply aware of the collective importance of survival. When Petra was eventually absorbed into the Roman Empire, its water system continued to function, and the Romans even expanded on it, adding baths and other luxuries. But over time, as trade routes shifted and earthquakes damaged infrastructure, the city began to decline. By the medieval period, Petra had largely fallen silent, its great facades left to weather in the sun and sand. The hydraulic system, so carefully maintained for centuries, was abandoned. The channels filled with debris, the cisterns went dry, and the gardens withered away. Visitors who stumbled upon the ruins saw only the stone monuments, not realizing that the true marvel of Petra had once been invisible, flowing quietly beneath their feet. Today, archaeologists and engineers study Petra's hydraulic remains, not only to understand the past, but to draw lessons for the present. In a world increasingly threatened by water, scarcity, and climate change, the Nabateans' mastery feels eerily relevant. They thrived by paying attention to their environment, by capturing every drop without waste, by balancing human need with nature's unpredictability. Their technology may seem forgotten, yet its wisdom echoes forward. Petra reminds us that great civilizations do not simply rise from stone. They rise from the ability to harness and protect the most essential element of all. And so, as you picture Petra beneath the desert stars, think not only of the treasury's grand facade glowing in the moonlight, but of the hidden veins of water that once pulsed through the city. Imagine the quiet drip into a plastered cistern, the soft trickle along a carved channel, the cool darkness of underground reservoirs. In those sounds lies the heartbeat of a civilization that turned a desert into a living city. The facades may capture our eyes, but the water silent, vital, and unseen was what sustained Petra's soul.